My name is Evan Brooks. I'm 31, grew up on the edge of the Upper Peninsula, and for 5 years I scrubbed blood and rot from the basements of regional hospitals. I worked nights because my life fit into nights, college classes by day, snowplow shifts some winters, and a steady hatred for small talk. The morgue at St. Larkin Medical in an industrial part of Michigan suited me. Isolated, humming refrigeration, the long anonymous corridors that led to the service elevator. The job was simple in my head. Be meticulous, be unseen, do not ask questions. We were caretakers of endings, not participants in them. There's an odd mercy in routine when you work with death. You learn where the stains hide, which chemicals cut bone dust, and how to move so the pathologist isn't distracted when they work. My title never came with glory. It bought me a steady paycheck and cover from the things I did not want to face in daylight. Then a series of small, insistent events around a single drawer, drawer 8, broke the quiet and rearranged everything I thought I knew. The incident started as an odd noise and turned into a pattern that outlived every explanation we offered. I'm writing this because I have to name what I saw. That naming is the only thing that keeps me from replaying the silence until it becomes a hall where I live. People think morgues are only about bodies and antiseptic, but they are also about records, protocols, and the weight of small administrative choices. Drawer 8 became a locus because of 1,000 small decisions, a shelving choice, a maintenance pause, a family who couldn't travel, and staff who filed a note in a cabinet and moved on. The pattern repeated. New people came. The same drawer insisted. This confession is not sensational. I will not claim overt supernatural theatrics, and I will not assure you of airtight logic. I will tell you what happened, how it altered me, and why I cannot walk by a refrigerator wall without imagining a fist tapping from inside its cold throat. The structure of the story follows my last 6 months at St. Larkin. I begin with the first whisper and end at the point where being invisible was no longer safe, where asking questions became necessary, and where I learned why silence has a shape. If you want the short version, here it is. Drawer 8 knocked. A body bag breathed. Refrigeration logs showed odd dips. Staff reported movement. Things that should have remained closed opened themselves. The pattern repeated with different names across years. The hospital shuffled notes and closed files. I did not. There are details beyond the headlines. The taste of copper in my mouth the night the lid cracked. The way the fluorescent light pooled like an accusation. And this is my attempt to set those details down before they calcify into something I cannot name. I will break this confession into 10 parts for your and my sake. Short chapters for TDS pacing, so each beat lands cleanly. Sit with the fact I was a janitor who thought his primary duty was to wipe surfaces. That belief lasted until drawer 8 started asking to be opened. What follows is a slow strangle of evidence. Noises, shifts, personnel notes, an autopsy that said what the paperwork did not, and the way a simple janitorial career unraveled into a responsibility I never asked for. I remember the first time I heard a proper knock from drawer 8 because it was stupidly ordinary before it became uncanny. It was an early January night when the snow had packed into walking quiet drifts and the hospital's HVAC stuttered like a tired animal. The morgue is under the main hospital, a place where pipes sigh and old elevators make their own music. I had been there 3 winters by then and had learned which noises belonged to the building and which did not. At 2:13 a.m., while I was mopping the tile that reflected the fluorescent strips like a broken mirror, I heard 3 clear, measured taps from the left bank of mortuary drawers. At first I thought someone was playing a stupid prank. We get odd pranks sometimes. Engineers testing alarms. Interns with a morbid sense of humor. I kept mopping and told myself I'd holler if it happened again. The taps repeated, tap, 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 not a creak, not a settling groan. The sound had rhythm and was nearly human in cadence. I looked up, heart ticking like a separate clock. Drawer 8 sits low, near the floor. The sound seemed to vibrate through the concrete. I went over, not thinking, and pulled drawer 8 out a few inches. The bag inside was closed, the tag stapled to the card holder. Everything looked normal and completely wrong. I closed it with a quick push and the tap stopped. The simplest explanation was mechanical, an air pocket, condensation, something jostling free. It made sense at the level of words, but not in the way my body registered the fact. Machines make uneven noises. Knocks are human. That night, I logged it in my sheet. Unidentified sound from drawer 8, 0213. I wrote the time in block letters because the act of writing steadied me. The log never changes things. It is paper, a record, an exhale on a form for people who will read bullet points and move on. I told Frank, the security guard who walks late rounds with coffee in a styrofoam cup and a face like someone who has learned not to be surprised. He shrugged and said maybe a rat got in the wall. The HVAC tech said condensation could do it. Everyone offered plausible, prosaic answers. Yet that night, when the elevator took me back up and the wards above were bright with monitors and faint conversations, I felt a small, stubborn knot in my chest that wouldn't be explained by pipes. The taps had a rhythm like a code. I did not know why, but I began to listen. The second reporting of the taps, a week later, same time, same cadence, cemented the pattern. Different bodies had come and gone. Personnel shifted on rotating schedules. Each time I heard the 3 knocks the same way. Precise, patient, ordinary as breath. The logs began to show a string of identical entries. Drawer 8 was being noticed, and noticing is a dangerous first step because once you see something you cannot easily unsee how it fits the world. On a late shift in February, 2 weeks after the first tap, the knocking escalated into a movement I won't forget. We had 4 admissions that day, a traffic fatality, an overdose, an elderly man with congestive failure, and a hospice transfer. The staff tags were in place. The body in drawer 8, an older woman with no family on the registry, had been transferred from a county home that morning. I worked through my routine till about 1:40 a.m., then the knocks started again. This time, it wasn't purely auditory. The vinyl in drawer 8 made a small sound like a breath. I froze halfway through pouring a cleaning solution. You can tell the difference between decompositional gases and a wet inhale. Decomposition groans and shifts slowly as gases expand. This was a shallow, regular intake like someone testing the air. I went to the drawer and eased the handle. The bag was zipped, but the chest area, where the vinyl bulged over the ribcage, rose and fell in a terrible, impossible rhythm. My whole mouth went dry. I knew the protocols. Do not tamper, call security, call pathology. But my feet moved before my head. I clicked on my phone flashlight, and the light trembled over the glossy black. The bag moved again. A small, slow exhale. Then 3 distinct taps from inside, in sync with the breath's end. I backed away and called the front desk. Frank came down with 2 guards. We checked vitals. There were none. The refrigeration temperature, nominal, and the lock on the drawer intact. We unzipped the bag at the pathologist's instruction, Dr. Moran, who came barefooted from the lab in a knitted cap and took this weird, grave-faced control like it was merely another tool. Inside, the body was cold, post-mortem rigidity beginning. Dr. Moran felt the chest and declared what the records claimed, dead for hours. But he took samples and noted abrasions on the wrists. He put on a glove and tapped the side of the rib cage and made a note. Attempted movement? Gas expansion? Mechanical mimicry? Document. No neat answer emerged. The pathologist told security to write the event up and to keep a log. It felt like bureaucratic triage of the uncanny. Codify, label, file. Still, at 4 a.m., I sat in my car in the empty lot and tried to taste the logic of the night. The body hadn't been breathing. Something in the bag had, or something had made it seem as if it had. I slept poorly, existing in the way you do when you are waiting for a sound that you know could be either wind or a voice. After that night, the small file in pathology began to grow. Dr. Moran entered detailed notes, timestamps, bag conditions, refrigeration logs, and even staff interviews. I found myself spending more time than was required reading the records. The human habit of turning over documents is how curiosity morphs into obsession. Drawer 8's log developed a dossier. 3 tap incidents, 2 instances of bag motion, an odd temperature dip lasting 14 minutes at 3 o'clock on one night, and a maintenance note about a worn roller on the drawer's track that had been temporarily repaired. Each entry had that clinical tone that makes horror domesticated. It becomes data. I met a woman named Lena who worked in records and who had been at St. Larkin for decades. She brought up an earlier memo from 2009 where a night attendant reported sounds from 8 and was gently counseled about stress leave. Lena's eyes hardened. "We've papered over odd things for years," she said. "Same drawer, different names." That sentence landed like a stone. A string of small forgettings turned into a pattern when you mapped the dates. 1998, 2009, 2017, and the current winter. People come and go, buildings age, small anomalies recur and are smoothed away by meetings and emails. We attempted technical fixes, new roller bearings for drawer 8, recalibrated seals, an inspection of the HVAC ducting that ran behind the refrigeration bank. The refrigeration company logged everything and swore the unit was within spec. Security reviewed tape. Cameras pointed at the row showed static and then normal footage, nothing to account for the taps at the low level that seems to vibrate below camera angle. That was a lesson, that some sounds live under the angle of the lens. People suggested plausible theories. Rodents, settling pipes, an echo from the street above. It's a weird thing to watch everyone produce reasonable hypotheses and then watch none of them land. On an administrative level, the hospital chose discretion. No press release, no public notice. There's a structural incentive for hospitals to quiet anomalies, concern for families, legal exposure, and the bureaucratic impulse to avoid stories that make patients fear institutional competence. But someone cannot remain quiet about a recurring phenomenon for long if it sits under your hands. Watching others tolerate the odd made my tolerance shrink. The mild outrage of a janitor can be a powerful motivator. My curiosity hardened into a small pledge. I would keep a personal diary of every odd occurrence and share it with anyone willing to listen. I started digging, not in the way of thieves or vandals, but with paper and memory. The old ledger room smelled of coffee and copier toner. There are paper lives in there, file folders with dates, typed client numbers, and brown sticky notes that read "call family" or "no contact." With Lena's help, I pulled 3 older incidents tied to drawer 8. Each file had a similar arc. An overnight staffer hears a knock, files a single-page report, gets rotated out or quits, and the folder is closed. In 1998, the notation was terse. Night shift report. Noises, no cause found. Advised to monitor. In 2009, night attendant reports repeated knocking. Tickets submitted. HVAC normal. Employee given sick leave. No further action. In 2017, drawer 8. Unusual movement noted. Autopsy reveals signs of restraint. The 2017 case held a detail that snagged my chest. The deceased had healed abrasions on her wrists and ankles, and a notation about possible prior restraint or confinement. The family had been unreachable. The coroner had closed the case, and the file sat as one more administrative thud on the shelf. The resonance of similar human details, marks on wrists, isolation, names that vanish, made Drawer 8 feel less like an object and more like a node in a trajectory of neglect. I began to imagine the lives that had ended in that low, cold place. A woman who had been moved by cost and convenience, an elderly man with estranged kin, a refugee whose social ties dissolved into paper forms. It hurt to look at those names and not be able to stitch a whole story. Patterns are brutal because they demand explanation across time. I started leaving post-its in the ledger margins with questions. Ask security about Dennis, 2009. Review refrigeration log for January 12, 2017. Contact local unions for any terminated staff. The bureaucracy tolerated my note-taking but did not answer them. Hospitals are full of half-closed doors. You stand at the threshold and file papers to make your own small sense. Those files made me less a janitor in my own estimation and more an archivist of small horrors. At night, I would pin 2 maps to my garage wall, one of staff rotations and another of incident dates. You can make something of anything if you look long enough. Eventually, the maps suggested a rhythm. New night attendants were almost always the ones to notice Drawer 8 first, and then within a month, they left. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. Patterns call for exploration. Exploration is often the first step toward truth. Technology is supposed to make mysteries harder, not softer. We installed a small Overwatch camera the week after the bag moved. It was angled down, intended to capture a corner of the floor and the lower drawers. Someone at admin insisted cameras were an answer. The footage was maddening. At 1:43 on the night of March 2nd, the feed shows an empty morgue, a janitor, me, folding a mop cloth, then a little flicker in the lower left of frame as the light shivers. The audio is thin in the basement. You can barely pick up footsteps. At 1 hour 44 minutes and 17 seconds, the camera compresses for a half second and returns with an otherwise identical frame. There is no obvious movement. The taps do not register. The footage is neither proof nor disproof. It's a refusal. I learned the camera had blind spots by design for privacy around drawers and sensitive zones, but it certainly felt like a metaphor. We had eyes, but not the right ones. We sought empirical proof and found gaps where the world allowed haunting. Lena suggested a simple experiment. Place a jar of wooden tongue depressors on the floor by Drawer 8 to see if vibrations or drafts could nudge them. I laughed at the quaintness of it, but agreed. On the 4th night of the experiment, I returned from coffee and found the jar toppled. The sticks lay splayed across the tile, and 3 lay lined up near the drawer like a primitive Morse code. I snapped the picture for the file and felt ridiculous doing it. The tongue depressor test failed to explain the bag's breathing, but it added a tactile detail. Tiny forces concentrate and move things in ways the eye trusts but the mind doubts. If a small jar could be upset, what of a vinyl bag? Maintenance ran another check and found the upper shelf vibrationally connected to a hollowed junction in the foundation where runoff pipes diverted under the floor. The HVAC tech called it resonant coupling and said the unit required no further work. The answer arrived as plausible physics, and yet the personal element, the repeated taps, the breaths, the abrasions, resisted being folded into a neat engineering memo. I began to record the nights in a voice memos folder labeled simply E. Brooks, 3am. Speaking the nights sounds into a phone made them smaller somehow. Saying tap, 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 breath, taps, aloud gave the sequence words that could sink into logic. It calmed me enough to sleep. Still, when I closed my eyes, the taps formed a rhythm like someone rehearsing a short phrase. Over and over, knock, knock, knock. The morgue was not loud at night, but the silence had teeth. The escalation happened fast. The tapping, which had been patient, learned to insist. On a night when the hospital was empty, Holiday staffing. 3 different attendants reported the taps within 6 hours. No single person could be dismissed as oversensitive. Around 2:30, I was sweeping near drawer 8 when a sound like a frame being pried echoed from the hall. The crematorium door, long and used, had a warped hinge and began to creak sendingly. The hollow corridor connected to the morgue via a narrow auxiliary alley. Dust and memory lived there. The creak bled into the taps like a metronome, adding a disturbance. I walked the auxiliary corridor and felt the cold thrum through concrete. The crematorium had been shuttered after they built the off-site facility. Shifting policy and community outrage had moved flame and ritual away from the hospital. No one used that hallway often, and its presence was an institutional afterthought. That night, I found a shoe print in the dust near the crematorium entrance that matched a size I did not have in my closet. The security logs showed no authorized entry. Frank swore he had not passed there. The print, a human size, suggested some other kind of traffic. And then a new phenomenon. The drawer itself opened on its own, an inch at first, then slid to a half opening as if a hand had tugged it. The sound was hydraulic and intimate, wood on metal. I felt my throat close. I backed away, radioing security without a thought. When they arrived, we found the drawer fully closed and sealed, the seal intact, tags stapled in place. The CCTV showed nothing. The patrolman, a methodical man named Ortega, muttered that the hospital life preserves its mysteries in the machinery. He used the phrase to humanize the inexplicable. We replaced the roller again and tightened the seals. We also taped a small brass bell to the drawer's interior edge as an indicator for movement. The bell rang, twice at 3:02. Not the 3 taps. 2 small metallic chimes jangled, soft and brief. When we opened the drawer, nothing moved, and yet the bell's ribbon had swung as if an unseen finger had brushed it. If the physical world offered us a sound we could not reconcile with sight, we were left with the uneasy duty of choice: ignore or react. We did both: react in short, administratively tidy bursts, and otherwise file the episodes away in night shift notes like curiosities we might one day explain. But the bell persisted as a witness to a noise that had no camera footprint. The autopsy that finally forced us to stop treating drawer 8 as an idiosyncratic ghost came 2 months later. A woman named Marjorie Hart, no immediate family listed, pension card found in a wallet, had been admitted and placed into drawer 8 on a folding stretcher pushed by a hospice driver who didn't want questions. She had been found collapsed in a motel room 3 days earlier and pronounced by EMTs. Dr. Moran's forensic exam found something 14 pages of a report couldn't keep polite. Healed ligature scarring on the wrists and ankles, cartilage changes suggestive of prolonged restraint, and signs of pressure applied repeatedly to the torso. The cause listed was cardiovascular collapse, but the margins told a more complicated human story. When I read the report, the cold room seemed to tilt. Finger fractures in distal phalanges matched the pattern you'd expect if someone clawed at a lid. Dr. Moran allowed for multiple interpretations in his clinical notes, but the implication, a life shaped by restraint, folded into the earlier records with a cruel clarity. The taps were no longer a mechanical curiosity. They were a possible signal, a reach from the end of a life that had left traces. We tried to find kin. The laptop with the last known address returned to a trailer park. Neighbors shrugged and said they'd known her as Marge and never seen anyone. There was no easy arc to the tragedy. I began to think of drawer 8 as less haunted and more like an archive of wrongs. You don't need ghosts to make horror. Systemic neglect, quiet isolation, and the paperwork of social abandonment are terrifying enough. The tapes and the logs became less about proving the impossible and more about refusing to let a life be reduced to a single burial entry. Dr. Moran pushed the coroner's office. They opened an inquiry into possible prior abuse. The hospital, which had earlier shrouded the event with discretion, now found itself in the awkward public posture institutions hate, needing action without simple answers. That process changed the staff. Some left. The night attendants who'd joked at the start no longer smiled at Drawer 8. New hires glanced at the refrigeration bank with the unease of people who accept that not every job is purely functional. I found that I could not easily separate the audible pattern, tap, breath, taps, from the human silhouette the autopsy suggested. Someone who had known confinement and attempted, perhaps many times, to signal an outside world. That thinking made me braver and angrier in equal measure. The inquiry slowed some bureaucratic inertia, but could not unbend history. The coroner's office was courteous and serious, asking for more samples, more interviews, and for preservation of the Drawer 8 chain of custody. The investigation also drew attention from an investigative reporter who wanted a morgue mystery piece, and suddenly the quiet institutional response could not remain neutral. The hospital held press conferences with carefully chosen phrases. We take patient dignity seriously. We are reviewing our protocols. But in the quieter places, the ledger room, the stairwell behind the lab, people traded stories that sounded like folklore. Dennis, who quit after hearing taps in 2009, a night surgeon who once smelled the distinct perfume on a late-shift body, a former admin who remembered a tipped jar of tongue depressors. Then, on a snow-muted night, the loop repeated in a startling way. A new night attendant, a young woman named Rosa who'd been hired 2 months after I began keeping notes, called security 2 hours into her shift. She reported the taps and, more disturbingly, an image, a small handprint smudged on the inner lip of Drawer 8 when she opened it for cleaning. She swore she had sanitized thoroughly, knew the difference between condensation and a mark. Ortega checked the printed frame and the bell. There was a faint, partial mark. It could have been print residue from a glove, a smear of cleaning solution, or something else. Rosa quit that week. The pattern tightened like a noose. Someone notices, someone records, someone leaves. The loop had a social angle. Staff turnover clustered around the drawer, and the drawer's incidents followed a pattern that refused accidental explanation. I looked at the tape again and again. In the gaps between frames, the sound existed like a note we could hear but not translate. The hospital, exhausted by the publicity and the coroner's involvement, finally agreed to a formal structural review of the morgue and an external audit of policies. They also offered counseling to night staff, which in my experience was both helpful and a thin institutional salve. People need to speak about trauma to make it manageable. Talking did not make the tap stop. I carry the memory of Rosa's hands more than any single night. She left an artsy scarf at the locker and asked me to mail it if she didn't return. When I mailed it, I wrote a risky note. If you ever want to talk about it. She sent a short text back. Nope. I quit. Good luck. That was the loop. Attention sparks fear. Fear drives attrition. Attrition preserves the drawer's silence for a while longer. The system rotates, new people arrive, and the pattern waits like ice underfoot. This is where my confession tightens into its visible seam. I stopped being the invisible janitor. I started to keep records outside the official logs and to place small objects near Drawer 8. Not to prove anything. Paper and cameras failed us, but to make small witnesses. A bell, a jar of wooden sticks, a scrap of masking tape with time notations. I did what any person does when they have seen a pattern that terrifies them. I documented. I called the coroner's office more than once, demanded that they reopen old files, and finally, against administrative resistance, they reclassified one old case as further inquiry advised. That reclassification had the tangible effect of making Drawer 8 less of a stain to be wiped and more of a research subject. I also quit, not from fear. though fear sat in my gut most nights, but because the moral pressure of noticing outweighed the paycheck. If you hear a body in a bag attempt to breathe and you do nothing beyond charting it, you are complicit in a kind of cruelty. Leaving was not a retreat. It was a refusal to accept silence as an answer. I mailed my small record to a journalist and to a private watchdog. I kept a copy in a drawer in my own house, alongside a Polaroid of the tongue depressor layout and a photocopy of the 2017 coroner's note. People asked why I did not go public sooner or why I did not pursue legal action. Those questions presume singular agency. I did what I could within a fragile institutional framework that prefers equilibrium to complexity. I amplified the pattern, passed papers to those who could look with different privileges, and left. The hospital instituted some policy changes, added an auditory watch for older interments, required immediate maintenance for any drawer anomaly, and attached motion sensors to low drawers. The motion sensor once tripped at 3:03 on a night when nobody was scheduled. The log recorded it as anomaly. That word sits like glass in my mouth. I cannot prove anything to the satisfaction of everyone, but I can leave records, and I can bear witness. Drawer 8 still exists. Beds and drawers will always exist. Some nights I drive past St. Larkin and watch the sodium lamps wash the parking lot. I think about the woman whose chest had marked evidence of struggle and how the taps might have been an insistence, not of a ghost, but of a person who had once been alive and perhaps wanted someone to notice. That thought has ethical weight. It moves you from spooky curiosity into responsibility. If you take anything from this confession, let it be a small and stubborn thing. Listen. Procedures exist for a reason, but so does attention. When people report sounds, record them. When objects move, preserve them. When a pattern repeats over years, it is not always superstition. Sometimes it is a record of neglected lives asking, in the only way they can, to be recognized. I have left the morgue, but I have not left the duty. I continue to write, to give my files to those who will read them, and to be an irritant in any conversation that wants to look away. I do not seek sympathy. I seek remembrance. The dead do not always speak in words. They sometimes speak in acts, a knock, a breath in vinyl, a mark on a lid. If you find yourself in a position to listen, do not leave it to a log entry. Answer the knock however you can.